The following feature presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to Star Warsologies, the podcast about science and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. My name is Melissa Miller. I'm a science communicator, science writer, lots of bylines at Star Wars Insider magazine.
I'm James Floyd, your co-host. I also used to write for Star Wars Insider magazine. We're still grieving the loss of the magazine. I'm the author of the Star Wars Crossword Puzzles book. This episode, Star Warsologies, is going to chat about the concept of awe and Star Wars. Our guest expert today is Professor Deana Weibel. She is a professor of anthropology and religious studies at Grand Valley State University in Michigan. Hi, Deana.
Hi, nice to see you both. Thank you for inviting me.
I first met Deana through my Ewok article for Star Wars Insider magazine. We talked a lot about what C-3PO being a god to the Ewoks might mean about culture and those sorts of things, which was a super fun conversation. And I've been looking forward to nerding out about new topics of Star Wars with you. So I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you. And that was a fun article because two people from my department were cited. So we became kind of like the center of Ewok studies and anthropology for a while, which was nice.
Oh my gosh.
Nice.
Amazing.
That should be its own department. We were talking about religious studies, but you want to talk about this much broader concept, the concept of awe. Can you tell us what that is and how you came to study it?
Sure. The way I got interested in awe is that I am an anthropologist of pilgrimage. So I'm used to going to places where people believe they are going to interact with the supernatural. So the shrine that I studied in France, Rocamadour, is a Black Madonna site. It also has some pre-Christian things going on that are interesting to some pilgrims. So the people who would come there, some were tourists who just thought it was beautiful, but it was built on the side of a cliff. So you would have a visual that was very striking of these buildings halfway up the side of a cliff. For several of the churches, the cliff face itself was the fourth wall of the church, which would be amazing because if it would rain, the water would trickle down inside the church building. So the sense of being connected to nature, but also the idea that the buildings were clinging to the side of the cliff itself would strike people as unusual and moving. And the idea that the supernatural might be present there, whether it was the Virgin Mary or a pre-Christian goddess or just energy. Those were all things I was told when I was doing that work there. And I was drawn to the idea that people could go to a place and feel that they were in the presence of something overwhelming that they couldn't quite understand. And so I think I got interested in awe there. And when I met my husband, Glenn E. Swanson, space historian, and got kind of pulled into his culture of, space people, I began to realize that Frank White's idea of the overview effect was very similar to what I was seeing in France in Rocamadour. And I started interviewing pilgrims or astronauts. Astronauts, pilgrims, they're kind of the same thing in my mind. And that experience of looking at the Earth and feeling very small in comparison, especially when you're doing a spacewalk, was something I saw as sort of parallel and began developing that idea until astronauts began to talk to me about not looking at Earth, but looking out into space.
Yeah, I think we must have talked about the overview effect when we chatted about Ewoks, but it's really stuck in my head ever since. And, that was a few years ago. Since then, there's this sort of tourism, rich people, space flights. And I mean, even, people made fun of Katy Perry and William Shatner and stuff like that talking about it. But even that sort of level of things, people came back to Earth with a different perspective. And I remember hearing about with Sally Ride, and you had talked about just like pretty much everyone you talked to. It's really, as a concept, stuck in my head ever since you pointed it out to me, basically. And talking about Star Wars, we have a sense of awe as a audience, in Star Wars, but is there anyone sort of like in universe? And the only thing I could kind of come up with was, Han Solo in The Force Awakens being like, it's all true, kind of thing. And coming from that character, that was a very touching moment. But in Star Wars, space flight and the unknown and the vastness of space isn't given in-universe awe as much as one might expect, I guess.
I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think you're right overall. It's very different from Star Trek, if I'm allowed to mention Star Trek here, where
I think Star Trek comes up almost every episode. So
okay,
it's a
perfect.
save for that.
The premise in Star Trek is that you're, exploring strange new worlds, right? You're going from one place to another and it's amazing and you don't know what you're going to find. Everybody's constantly in this state of wonder. Star Wars is a little bit different because there's this sense that everything's mapped and you know who lives everywhere. And there's this, it's almost like, would you be awed going into Indiana from Michigan? It's like, no, it's just, it's there. That's where that is, but I've been thinking more about it, and there are two characters who seem to experience awe more than everybody else, and one is Luke Skywalker. And so he is obviously the audience proxy. He's the protagonist, but he definitely has moments where he's confronted not with space as something he doesn't understand, which is, maybe I should talk a little bit about the Ultraview Effect, because that's
Please do.
The premise of the book. And I mentioned the Overview Effect, which is looking back at Earth. I'll give you an example. I use this sometimes when I give presentations. There's a quote from Richard Garriott, video game, former president of the Explorers Club, and he went into space with the Russians through a company called Space Adventures. And this wasn't like a 5 minutes in space kind of thing. He was on the International Space Station for 11 days, long enough to spend some real time there. And he talked about, on one quote that I used in my book, he looked out at Earth and got to know it. And he said, I get it now. I can see how thin the atmosphere is. I can see how the continents are. I understand it now. The person I interviewed who, following anthropological convention, I call Zach as a pseudonym in my book, when he first talked to me about going into space, yes, Earth was interesting, Earth was vibrant, Earth was alive, but when he was in orbit around the moon, and was the only person in the space capsule, and got on the far side of the moon, got in the shadow of the Earth and the shadow of the moon simultaneously. By the way, this is something the Artemis II astronauts were not able to achieve. They were always getting light from somewhere. But Zach was, orbiting multiple times, got in a position where there was no light at all, turned off the lights in the capsule, waited until his eyes adapted to the dark, and then looked out the window. And the way he described it was there were so many stars he couldn't see between them. He said he wasn't prepared for seeing the stars in that level of magnitude. It blew him away. And the quote I used from him to juxtapose against the Richard Garriott quote is, he looked out and realized we don't know crap about anything. We really don't. And that is fundamentally the difference between, I think, the Overview Effect. You don't know everything about the Earth. We don't know everything about how it works and what climate change will do and if it's self-regulating and how those things happen. But when you look out in space, you really don't know what's out there. Star Wars doesn't have that, but that idea of being made aware of something you cannot actually understand fully, I think is something that Luke Skywalker experiences a lot. To some extent, it's space, right? He's a farm boy. He's looking out at the twin suns, He's got this feeling of what's out there. I want to get off this planet. In some ways, his story actually parallels a lot of the stories of the astronauts I interviewed, which is, I'm on this planet, but I think about what's out there all the time. I want to go see it. And then he does go out and see it. And he's the one who has no experience traveling in space, who is experiencing things for the first time. But where he really feels awe is when realizing that the Force is out there, that the Force is real, that it's something to be in contact with. Han Solo gets there eventually, but certainly not in the original trilogy. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then the other thing that gives people a lot of awe are the capacities of the Empire's big machines, including the Death Star. That's no moon thing. That whole sequence is people going, what are we trying to understand here? The Force, though, is a lot harder to understand than the Death Star. You can't find the Force's exhaust ports and blow it up in quite the same way.
Going back to, Luke and the Force, what you look at when Luke watches Yoda lift the X-Wing out of the swamp on Dagobah, and that is pure awe, because even though he knows a little bit about the Force, this is mind-blowing to him that you could lift something that big. And I think that shows, his whole worldview has changed kind of in that moment. So that's one of the moments I think of awe. So it's not so much the awe of space travel for him, but it's that same thing of knowing that there is this whole other world out there that I have just touched the surface on. And I realize, just how small I am and how much more I have to learn. The phrase that I don't know crap about this. And,
Right.
And I think, we see that with when he trains Rey. Again, it's that Rey discovers this like, oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, touching into the Force is definitely that moment of awe. I wonder if the Jedi as Padawans in the Jedi Order would ever get that, because they see people using the Force every day from a young age.
Right.
So maybe they don't have necessarily that reverence for that first moment.
They're not
to
outsiders.
Connect with the Force. Yeah, they're not outsiders.
And I think that makes a big difference. With Luke especially, too. You were leading to it, but the pattern I saw in the astronauts, I interviewed about this, and astronauts, it's kind of the shorthand to go out and like see the stars. I talked to a few who'd been able to do that. Most have not been able to do that. In fact, one of the astronauts I interviewed had to wait until a later mission because the mission he was on, the initial ones, they weren't willing to turn out the lights in the spacecraft. They just didn't want to bother with it. There was work to do. And it was seen as kind of this self-indulgent thing, was to like turn off all the lights and get dark adapted. That's going to take 20 minutes or something. So why would we do that? Right. And he finally got somebody as a commander of the mission who was like, okay, we'll do it. And then it was amazing and everybody was amazed. But this idea that I've seen even in people who don't go into space themselves, who contemplate space on a regular basis. So like astronomers, engineers, people in space medicine who are like, how do we deal with radiation? How do we deal with microgravity? What's out there? If you're thinking about that all the time, I'm not trying to say that everybody involved in space exploration is humble, but there is this humility that comes when you confront those actual moments of how little you know. Do I think you can, for instance, just to pull an example out of the air, not referring to anybody in particular, if you own a big rocket space exploration company and you think you already know everything, you're never going to find these moments of realizing you don't. In fact, you might avoid them, which is something I talk about in the book, is why people might avoid feelings of awe. And part of that has to do with trying to project a certain amount of, like Han Solo is a good example of that. Han Solo wants everybody to know that he's completely competent in everything. So he's going to never let his guard down enough to admit even to himself that there's something he doesn't understand until much later. With astronauts, though, that I've talked to, that awe is often followed by a feeling of humility. And then once you realize you don't know things, then you want to know them. And I see that really clearly with Luke Skywalker going through this, oh gosh, this is amazing, followed by, if Yoda can lift that out and I can't, then I'm really nothing. And I have to be willing to do this. And then his willingness after the events in Empire to go back and train some more. Those are a really good example of that humility. And then that kind of renewed, now I know what I don't know, and I can be more thoughtful about the steps I take. And so in my book, I talk about exploring in a more humble fashion where you don't just go in and assume that you already know everything and you're just gathering more information. It's that, okay, I'm going to realize I'm confronting something new that I don't know about, and I'm going to keep in mind that I don't know while I'm learning about it so that I can actually learn rather than cut off the flow of learning. By the way, before I forget, the other character who experiences awe in second, in at least the original trilogy, pretty good at it, is R2-D2. So.
Oh, yay. Well, we're going to talk a lot more about that.
I just realized another moment of awe. Again, Luke Skywalker, it's when he walks into the cantina, and we're also feeling awe at that moment because we're just blown away of we see this galaxy and there's humans, and then boom, we are confronted with all these different aliens from all over the place, and they all look different and they sound different. And then one of them turns violent, and then, Obi-Wan uses his lightsaber and it's like, whoa, where did that come from? So that's just, again, he's just completely shocked by everything he sees, and probably realizing at that moment is wow, okay, I've heard of all these different species. I might have seen them, in holovids and stuff. Maybe I've come across, Jawas and stuff, but, nothing prepares you for just diving in like that.
Well, and that's an interesting thought, because I'm wondering now if the reason I overlooked Luke as a character that experiences awe is because, to me, it is so much of the, nudge, nudge audience, now's the time to feel awe because this character,
Okay.
kind of is.
Well, he's our
and so
proxy
maybe
for
I
sure.
just, right. It makes sense. And maybe it's just my lack of connection with Luke as a character too, that I just sort of miss this. But it's a really good point, James, because you're right. It does happen on planets too, not just, out in space. But I think that for me is at least a little bit of the disconnect. So I'm glad to understand where that came from.
I mean, it's like when you look at the Grand Canyon and you're just blown away because it's just so big.
Yeah. Yeah. I was definitely thinking about the sort of personal levels here, right? It's like you don't have to be an astronaut to be like,
No.
oh my God, the vastness of space. I am but a tiny speck. Those pictures that get taken of like the Earth from afar where it's like everyone who's ever lived and, is in this photo kind of thing.
Right.
And you were talking about the avoidance of, not just billionaire space company owners, but I don't like feeling those things sort of either sometimes, like I got to see, sometimes for a living, and those are the best stars you can probably see from Earth because you're nowhere near light pollution. And I'll sit out there for 20 minutes and be like, oh, this is beautiful. It's amazing. Oh my gosh. And then I'll start to feel like, I feel so insignificant. I need to go inside now,
Return back to, yeah.
I've talked to people and read stuff about people experiencing supernatural or paranormal events. And like you mentioned, that they don't want to confront the reality of them. And so they just compartmentalize and say, that didn't happen, but clearly something happened to them, but they don't want to think about it anymore because that would upset their worldview.
And that's the thing. I went to UC San Diego, and sometimes people will say, why do you have so much psychology in your anthropology? Well, I went to a department that specialized in psychological anthropology. So it definitely was something that I was exposed to in graduate school and continued to study. But there's something in psychology called accommodation. So if you have this unsettling moment, whether it's a supernatural occurrence or looking out into the Milky Way from the desert or something else that makes you feel like your sense of reality is shifting and it can be very uncomfortable, there's a strong psychological pull to get it back in place. And research that's been done in psychology suggests that if you can introduce religious ideas to people in those moments, they become the religious ideas become more appealing because then there's an explanation for that shift in what's going on. One example would be ancient people building these giant monuments, right? The pyramids in Egypt or South America, or even Notre Dame in Paris, these huge, amazing buildings. The idea is that the country people would come in and be, how can this exist? What is this? And somebody's there, let me tell you about God. And that works in a way. It can help somebody trying to introduce new ideas because people are struggling for that accommodation. They want an explanation for something that's happening that they don't understand. So for Luke Skywalker, it's that feeling of what is going on. Well, let me tell you about the Force, right?
Right.
And so it creates that moment, especially when he's got the helmet on and he's doing the exercises with the little target floaty thing.
The remote.
The blast shield down. Yeah.
The blast shield down. No, I won't be able to see anything. And then he can. And it's like that moment of amazement. Meanwhile, we've got Han Solo, who's, hokey religions. Like he just won't go there.
I now am just imagining Obi-Wan Kenobi passing out pamphlets. What is the Force? Come join us today. And, Luke's like, oh yeah, let me open this up. And
yeah, well, and very funny. So we're recording this on a Sunday, and literally I had to mute my audio a little while back because the church people are on my doorstep. They come around after services or whatever and knock on the door, and the dog started barking. So it's just sort of funny that it's like it literally happened but yeah, maybe if they got me as I walked into, I remember walking into the St. Peter's, is that the one in Vatican City?
Yeah.
As a teenager, right? As off on my European backpacking trip or whatever, and being like, oh, no, I get it, right? This is awe-inspiring. This is a moment. James mentioned the Grand Canyon. That's another thing I didn't see until I was an adult. And I was like, oh my God. Like I could just stare at this for hours kind of thing. So
a more recent one that some of us did sort of vicariously was the Artemis 2 mission, right?
Yes.
Where if you followed that one Monday in early April, I can't remember the date, but they that was when they did the flyby the moon, and they had that weird eclipse that lasted 54 minutes, and they were just freaking out. And it was so gratifying for me to hear people like Reed Weissman saying things like, we didn't evolve for this. I'm like, that's in my book.
Nice.
Or, my mind can't process what I'm seeing also. Or Christina Cook saying something like, oh, the only thing I can feel is humility. And I was like, yeah. It was gratifying, but at the same time, I was thinking, and where did I hear all this? I heard it from astronauts. So obviously astronauts are going to have these moments. But if you can imagine seeing something like the moon that close up, and you've never seen that before, a photograph doesn't do it justice. It's in 3D. Asteroids are hitting it, or I guess they're meteorites at that point. But anyway, that feeling of awe that we saw with the Artemis 2 astronauts is something that's still pretty fresh, and that we hadn't had anything like it for 50 plus years.
Right. I was going to say, even me sitting on my couch in my comfy pants watching astronauts watch the moon was amazing, because that's something that hasn't happened in my lifetime, right? I was born in the 80s. We haven't been back to the moon. And there's so much more feedback you can have now in terms of what they were doing in real time and videos and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, even just those of us here on Earth, I think it was awe by proxy, or, something like that.
Yeah, I think so too.
I was thinking when you were talking about the sort of avoidance, and also listing off that the other people that experience awe are people who see the Death Star, that it reminds me that a lot of space movies, yes, there is the sort of awe, right? Project Hail Mary, is all about one dude being humbled, by all of this stuff. But there's also a lot of horror movies about space. We picked up this weird gelatinous mass and now we're all dead, and,
you can't understand it.
Right, only Sigourney Weaver and the cat survive, and those sorts of things. So I feel like there's this fine line between sort of awe and terror.
Yeah, I mean, awe itself, I did a lot to try to understand the emotion, and it's a combination of things. It's this weird combination of two of the elements are kind of like appreciation and admiration, but also, like you said, terror. When you look at something like the Milky Way, it's not comforting. Right.
Also in Star Wars, there's this notion of unexplained paranormal things like Force ghosts or the dark side cave on Dagobah, where a normal person would just be really freaked out. And Luke senses the dark side cave, and he's like, he feels cold and doesn't want to go in there. And then he experiences something that just like makes absolutely no sense. Like there's no logical anything for that. Yeah, what happens when we see a ghost? Is there that awe? Is it the reverence and admiration? Is it the terror? I guess it depends on how the ghost appears.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Though the Force ghost could be super scary now that we think about it.
Although they don't generally do scary things. They seem to kind of hang out on the sidelines, like in Return of the Jedi, or talk to you about what you should be doing.
Yeah, but that could really have gone a different direction if, like,
It'd be interesting if it was scary space Force ghosts.
Right, exactly. I'd never considered that before.
Yeah, we have the dark side cult on Exegol and the Rise of Skywalker, and stories of, Sith Lords and stuff that come back as dark side spirits, and that's got to be pretty scary. It's basically like the Mummy's Curse. You're going into these ancient tombs, and something is in the dark shadows ready to suck out your soul and, maybe possess you or something.
It would make me think like, oh, well, how come there, a Darth Maul, half a Darth Maul Force ghost or Palpatine Force ghost. But, it turns out
these legs come walking through.
There's two separate ghosts for Maul. Right. There's the top half and the bottom half.
But at least for those, they were both still alive, somehow. So that's maybe why there's not Force Sith taunting, Obi-Wan or something like that.
That would be fascinating, Force hauntings. Yeah.
Right.
There's an idea for a whole series there.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, there was a Robot Chicken episode where Jar Jar appears as a Force ghost to Darth Vader and just annoys him. He's like, oh, Annie, me so glowing. Look, we could have spent some time together for the next years. And Vader's just like, go away, Jar Jar. I want to sleep.
That's right. I remember, God, Robot Chicken got all of those things just so right. I should go watch those again.
Be a Ghostbusters Star Wars crossover.
Ooh. I like it.
Catching Force ghosts in that.
The ghost of Qui-Gon just gets sucked up, and Obi-Wan is like, well, that takes care of that. I don't have to listen to him anymore.
Right, exactly. Oh my god, hilarious. Well, let's talk about the best character ever, R2-D2.
Yes.
Another experiencer of awe, you say, and I'm trying to think about it. I'm trying to think of the noise he would make for awe, and
there's a lot of that. Ooh, kind of. That sounded more like Jar Jar, but his little beeps. He definitely responds emotionally to things, and I think that's part of it. Is his noises throughout let you know when he's apprehensive, but also when he's amazed, and also when he's afraid. So there's this ability to kind of gain his emotional state. He's also one of the most curious characters who just gets into things that he shouldn't be getting into. At the moment that Yoda is lifting the X-Wing and Luke is amazed, you can also tell that R2-D2 is amazed. Like,
right.
He's just sort of processing it. It's a lot easier to read Luke Skywalker because, facial expressions and saying things. But
I was going to say, maybe it's like neurodivergent of me, but I was like, I actually think it's easier to read R2-D2 because of the beeps and boos.
And then, of course, he's in contrast through a lot of the movies with C-3PO, who is not inclined to experience awe at all. So, he knows everything. He and Han Solo actually line up in some interesting ways in terms of knowing everything. But
I think C-3PO, when Luke is raising him in the chair at the Ewok village, instead of awe, he just freaks out. That he's like, what is going on? Luke, right. Stop it. But, at the same time, he's processing the fact that, like, this is really weird that these people are, worshiping me, and Luke wants me to pretend to be a god. How do you think religion works in a galaxy where there is the Force?
I mean, I think the Force would be understood. It reminds me of something I've seen in my field work among neo-pagans and Wiccans and folks, which is all the religions of the world are true. They're just how different communities read the same underlying phenomenon. So that might be me projecting a little based on that. But I feel like it would be hard if the Force is something that we know exists because of the way the stories are told. There's not a sense that we're going to find out at the very end the Force never existed at all or something, right? It's there. We have evidence of it. It's not fully understandable. The more you try to control it, the worse it goes. So that kind of feeling of respecting it and realizing, like, being comfortable with your ignorance of it is part of how to stay in balance with it. I mean, certainly somebody who's like super wise, like Yoda, doesn't act like, oh yeah, the Force is completely under control and we need to harness it and make it bend to our will. There's nothing like that on the light side. But I would think that religions would have to be ways of interacting with whatever the Force is. I suppose you could have a religion that's not connected to the Force at all, but I'm not remembering anything that looks like that in the larger universe.
Right, I was about to say, certainly in some comics and books and stuff, I'm sure there's some examples, but...
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of religions that just start off in a world, maybe spread out a bit, and then at some point when usually a religion might get shaken up of like, oh, hey, we're not the only life out in the galaxy. That first contact thing, that moment of awe, or at least mind-blowing when you realize you're not alone. But then that there's powers out there that maybe we don't know anything about, and it can be the Force, or it could also be the Death Star, that we're just so insignificant that there is this thing out there that can literally destroy our entire world in a moment. Should we revere the people who have this? Because, it's like that Arthur C. Clarke line that any sufficiently technological thing is indistinguishable from magic.
Right. I think there's this large feeling. My instinct, as you were talking, was thinking back to the Ewoks, because we have to always return to the Ewoks. They didn't respect the Death Star in quite the same way. It might have been something that they felt awe about, but they also knew it wasn't the really awe-inspiring thing. So the Force is always in comparison, and there's almost something arrogant about creating something. It's that idea between technology and religion, like what can destroy the world? Well, God can destroy the world, but couldn't we nuke, someplace too? Like, don't we have the technology to do something? I am become death, destroyer of worlds kind of idea of Oppenheimer, where he was quoting the Bhagavad Gita. He's using language of divine source to describe what humans are now capable of, or what he did. But that idea that that's not the real power, that the real power is something stronger. And I think the real power is something stronger is really obvious in Return of the Jedi. It's also really obvious in the original Star Wars A New Hope, because they're impressed by the Death Star. They have this moment of awe. But there's also this was made by mortals. This is not a supernatural object. And, here are the plans. And because we have the plans, we can overcome this, because even though it's awe-inspiring and terrifying and worthy of admiration, in some ways, it's certainly a pretty impressive machine. It can be destroyed because it was not something that has a supernatural or even Force origin. It's something that people made. And so it has flaws.
One of the great things about human-made stuff is that generally there is a way to destroy it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned Star Trek, and First Contact sort of thing made me think about it again. Like, what a time if the Vulcans would show up right now and the world, or at least enough of the world, would see, how much more is out there and how much we have to protect and stuff like that. I'd be real appreciative. I feel like we're in that timeline where, like, that's what's going to snap us out of this sort of thing. There's not really a question here. But, I did want to ask if you've seen Firefly and Serenity, though.
I did see Serenity. I've seen some episodes of Firefly, but I was one of the weird people who saw Serenity before I saw any Firefly.
And I don't remember, it might be in Serenity, because the Reavers are sort of the main part of that. Because in the movie they explain what actually happened. But it might be in an episode where they talk about people think the Reavers went mad because they got to the limit of space exploration, looked out, and saw nothing. And in that universe, they don't find any aliens, right? It is just humanity out there alone in a huge giant space. And that's maybe what drove the Reavers mad. So I'm, again, thinking about, the Ultraview effect, but switching it into terror. Firefly really took that concept.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with that. I don't think that was in the movie, but that is a scary kind of thing all on its own. If you remove the idea that there could be anything other than us in the universe and there's no explanation, it is absolutely terrifying.
Right.
It's the kind of thing that I was a little kid, I would start contemplating infinity and my stomach would start hurting.
Same.
And I'd have to stop.
Yeah.
But that idea of total isolation, I think, is one of the things that I worry about when I have these late night thoughts.
Right.
What if there is nothing else? What if there's nothing supernatural? It's all physical and we are the only life that developed anywhere. And it's just hard to know what to make of that.
I have a pamphlet for you.
Oh, thank goodness. Please.
Yeah, Star Trek is the future, not Firefly. Hooray,
But right now we're still, we imagine and we try to think about what could be out there and what our relationship could be like with whatever's out there. The project I'm working on right now with John Lomberg, who was on the original team for the Voyager Golden Record, trying to create an artifact that would go into space. And if it was found by whatever is out there, intelligent enough to pluck something out of outer space, that they'd be able to take this piece of metal. I think this is so genius, right? So you might remember the Pioneer plaque. I always think of it as like a personalized license plate kind of size thing where you've got, a human couple and you've got, this is sort of the sun and the 9 planets, because there were 9 planets then. And, and they've got the Pioneer spacecraft next to the people to try to show how big we are. And that was fine. It was taking a piece of metal, engraving it, protecting it so that it could last in space for billions of years. But with the Voyager Golden Record, and I should say I'm working on this with John Lomberg, who was the design director of the original Golden Record. So he was involved all the way. And then Glenn E. Swanson, my husband, who wrote Inspired Enterprise and is now working on this. So Star Trek guy, but also NASA historian guy. And instead of using it as let's engrave it to have pictures on it, it was let's engrave it to make a sound recording, to make it be a record that would actually play. They packed a stylus into each one no speakers or anything, but literally the directions on the front cover are, this is how to play it, showing how the stylus would fit in the record. You have literal sounds of earth, including like bubbling hot springs and mud pots and kinds of things, but you also have, they go from wolves barking to dogs barking to try to illustrate things like domestication. And then the music, obviously Chuck Berry, Mozart, a bunch of different international music, and then encoded pictures so that if you follow the directions, you can listen to these kind of sounds, kind of almost like a fax machine, and put together the different dark and lights, in some cases different colors. Like with a printer, you have the 3 colors that will combine into all colors. They're like 3 transmissions at the same time that somebody could combine to actually see color pictures of different things on Earth. And so to take the space that you would engrave something and send that out with the hope that somebody out there will somehow find it and know that we existed is just kind of amazing. And it wouldn't make sense at all in the Star Wars universe because everybody knows you're there and we're all connected to each other. And I think in some ways that fantasy of connection with everybody is a big draw for Star Wars. We come into Star Wars kind of in the middle. We don't know how any of this came about. With Star Trek, we get to kind of see the development of it. But where we are, we really don't know if we're shouting to nobody or if there's somebody there and we're going to wish we hadn't sent something out.
Right.
Right. It turns out they play the record backwards and they're like, oh my gosh, this is,
what a bunch of weirdos.
That is like, hey, they're cursing us out. We got to go find them.
And it's kind of fascinating because one thing that the team discussed, and this was Carl Sagan, Linda Salzman Sagan, Frank Drake, big engineer, Andrean, Timothy Ferris, and then John Lomberg, and 3 of them are still around. They discussed, should we show the negative sides of what we're doing? Like, should we include an image of a nuclear bomb going off? And the question was kind of, is that what we want them to learn about us if there's somebody out there? Or will they think that we're threatening them?
Right.
It's been criticized by some people as a very sanitized picture of reality on planet Earth. But it's kind of fascinating to think about what you would want to be included if you were making the decisions about what to send out. I don't think we're in the same universe as the Star Wars universe, but it is the same universe for Star Trek, and it does show up in the Star Trek, the motion picture.
That's right.
A later V'ger.
Yeah, so I mentioned it at the beginning, but Star Wars does create awe in us, the audience. I definitely had it. When the newer things come out and it happens again, it sort of reminds me that it's in the originals, but since I've seen those, so many times, I feel like
you can anticipate,
I'm not as awed by it because I've seen it so many times, but I mean, specifically the thing I'm thinking of is the meteor shower that happened in Andor during that heist was one of those moments where I was like, oh my God, Star Wars can be so epic. Even just some of the establishing shots, like, oh, now we're at this planet, those sorts of things that seem to mirror what we have, in our own universe. But yeah, are there any of those things that you really recognize or thoughts on how it has that ability to awe us?
Definitely. I mean, I think even starting with the crawl, because in a movie theater, you have this huge screen. It's different when you're watching it on your phone or something. But in a movie theater, that feeling of awe, for me, you mentioned the establishing shots. I think in Empire, which for me was like I saw Star Wars, A New Hope when it came out, but I was little. And I was a little bit older for Empire. And everything on Hoth filled me with awe. I didn't live in Michigan yet, so I hadn't seen snow like that. I was a Southern California girl. There's scenes where they're looking for Luke and Han, and the speeder is going up and over some hills. And I remember that I had this sensation of my stomach dropping. It wasn't like I was watching it in IMAX or something, and it wasn't 3D, but I could feel like I was there, and that feeling of being transported somewhere made me feel awe. I think also the asteroid belt scene where the Millennium Falcon is trying to dodge these, and there's this kind of snappy dialogue going on, and that the moment when you realize that where they've docked inside the asteroid is alive is also that feeling of, oh my gosh, this is so amazing, this is great, this is so scary at the same time. So you get those 3 things, you get awe. But I think the music too. The music creates awe. It creates an expectation of awe. It creates tension. It's like somebody playing your emotions in an expert way so that you're feeling what you need to be feeling at this moment so that the climax will hit, right? The music is a huge source of awe, and I know people who can experience awe just listening to the music.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the asteroid scene because in our previous episode that was about chemistry, so a very different subject, Seth also mentions the music in that scene, right? We brought up asteroids because we were talking about space slugs eating rocks and what is the chemistry involved in that. But talking about the way that scene is shot is, remarkable. So I just like that it came up in 2 back-to-back episodes of very different subject matter.
Yeah, that was also where Han and Leia had their first kiss. So that was like super important to me.
Fair.
Going back to Hoth, I went several years ago to Finse, Norway for their Hoth festival, and I went up to the glacier where they had filmed the trench battle stuff there. And going up there, I've been in the snow before, but I've never been someplace that had like no trees, no life. It was just rock and ice. Going out there and then realizing is like in all directions, I can see really, really far as I climbed up towards the plateau, but there is no sign of human civilization at all. I am off the map. And then getting up there and realizing is like, there was that sense of awe that I was on Hoth because there was nothing to indicate at all that I was on Earth. It kind of goes back to that Grand Canyon effect, but it was for me as a Star Wars fan, even more meaningful. And I think, as you mentioned, the music and then there's the effects, like at the time A New Hope came out, it was light years ahead in its special effects. And so that just blew people away. The Star Destroyer going over your head at the beginning of A New Hope.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
One of the things that really got me, I think it was in the Clone Wars, one of the later seasons, there was this explosion. It was just so beautiful because it brought in all these different colors. Like it wasn't just the standard boom, kind of yellowish white, but it was just really, really pretty. Like the lighting and effects departments upped their game to make this really beautiful, colorful thing. And it's like the meteor shower in Andor on Aldhani that it's just cranking things up a notch and kind of blowing your mind with it.
Yeah, and that makes me think of, like, I don't have a favorite lightsaber battle, right? It's like something people talk about, but I was like, I don't have one. And then honestly, in the new animated Maul series, now I do, right? Because they did such a job of it. That's something I completely took for granted or even like scoffed at, people being like, oh, what's the best lightsaber battle? There's one where it's like 5 different people all battling and there's just this one, it's like half a second where all of the lightsabers clash on each other. Like they're in like a circle basically. And I like had to rewind and screenshot and I wrote about it a little bit in a review for Fantha Tracks.
It's a great example. When you were talking about being where they filmed Hoth and that feeling of awe, one thing you said made me think of something else too. Vastness is really hard for us to comprehend. It's one of those things that makes us feel weird. And I was listening to an interview with a non-seeing mountain climber who had climbed Mount Everest, and they were talking to him about, well, people go up there for the view. You didn't have a view. And he said he was so used to sound bouncing back off of things that when he was that high up, and could just sort of realize that the sounds like he was making were just going on and never coming back. And it's a sense that I don't have developed, but there's a sense of openness that you were probably, James, picking up unconsciously where sound was just going on and not returning. And that can also contribute to those feelings.
Yeah, there was no sound.
Right. If you said something, you'd hear it. But the way that sound wasn't bouncing off things and coming back to you. Vastness, however you're sensing it, is something that can create that feeling of awe. And I think part of what Star Wars does is it creates this galaxy that is so expansive that even if we're just conceptualizing it rather than experiencing it through our senses, that can still create that feeling of wonder, that where do they live and how does this galaxy work? And that can be a huge source of pleasure and awe as well.
Well, definitely that curiosity that comes from awe, because it's like, yeah, I want to know more. Every little thing, there's got to be some story of why it is that way, or what's the story behind this alien, or how does it all come together, or even just like, how did they make this as a movie?
And I mean, even my sort of fascination with the bigger world of Star Wars, where like some background character walks by and I'm like, what about them? Let's follow them. You know, I guess that could be sort of considered it awe as well. I realized we never really asked you at the beginning, because I just sort of got right into it, about, you know, your relationship with Star Wars in general. I feel like it came up over the course of the conversation. But if there's anything else to add to your Star Wars story.
Our son's name is Luke.
When you talk about Luke so much, does it confuse you?
I always find myself going, Luke, and then I'm like, oh no, I become Aunt Beru.
That's exactly what I was picturing, as I would have a hard time not saying Luke.
Does your husband then say, like, I am your father?
It has happened before. I will not pretend that it doesn't. Our son Luke, he's way more into Andor and Maul than his parents are. So he's kind of finding his own Star Wars universe. But that was one of the reasons my husband Glenn and I sort of found each other. It was funny because we had a lot of weird things in common, but one of them is we had each made our own Star Wars costumes. And so that was a moment. He had apparently a really good Luke Skywalker costume, and I did the Leia costume. I remember making it out of sheets, laying it out, and using Rit dye to create the camouflage pattern on it after having seen just a few still photos, and probably in Starlog or something like that. My personal entry, my dad took me to see Star Wars when I was 7. He was very excited. He's like, you've got to see it. There's 2 robots and they're like Laurel and Hardy. There's the little fat one and the skinny one. And they give each other a hard time. And I was like, okay. And then I remember some of the characters came to Toys R Us near my house and getting to see stormtroopers and Darth Vader come through and just being like, that was awe. That was like, this is actually Darth Vader, because I was young enough that made a difference. But when I saw Empire Strikes Back, all I could think of was the carbon freeze scene and Han looking up. And I remember talking to a friend and saying, I think I'm in love with Han Solo. I was 10 and it was like my first emotional awakening into something like that.
Amazing.
Star Wars was deeply part of my childhood in junior high, including getting a random soldier from Hoth that I thought looked androgynous enough that I decided it was a female, and it was me. So I got to be inserted into little Hoth scenes, and the level of fantasy going on in my head in junior high was astonishing. So
we all had that, I think.
Yeah.
I'm jealous mine didn't get to really be oriented at Star Wars because it was between, movies. So that's awesome.
I will tell you as an aside that there were women soldiers at the Battle of Hoth. That,
it's just Kenner didn't seem to make one.
But when it was in the trenches, they had women be extras. And so some of those rebel soldiers, like there's a shot that I've seen is like one of them showing off her nail polish. And
I'd like to see that.
I would like to see that, and why they couldn't have made the action figures of that. So
yeah, I don't know if you ever see any of their faces, but they're there.
Right.
But they're there.
People talking about that in, with the X-Wing pilots in, probably it was Rogue One the first time or whatever. And it was like, this doesn't have to be a thing. Like, why are we talking about this? But it did make me, I grew up in Berkeley, so that level of annoyed about why my childhood couldn't have included, female X-Wing pilots and stuff like that.
I was excited when I saw female X-Wing pilots, and it does remind me a little bit of how excited I was that Christina Koch went to the moon, and now there's been a woman who went to the moon, which made a difference to me. Yes. Even if it maybe shouldn't, it did. So
yeah. Okay, so what about your favorite Star Wars character?
Yeah. Well, in love with Han Solo, want to be like Princess Leia in a lot of ways. Although I had a lot of Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff happening too. So in my head, it was always, am I more Leia or Marion? But I did end up doing kind of a combination in my work of Star Wars and Raiders. So I get to be an anthropologist, work with archaeologists, but it's doing space stuff too.
In space,
so
yeah.
That worked out. But I was always really envious of 3PO, even though he was annoying, because his ability to come up with any language that was necessary was something I really admired. And I did do my undergraduate degree in linguistics, in part because C-3PO combined with My Fair Lady just knocked me into, I must understand how language works.
Amazing.
Very cool.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry we didn't ask it at the top of the episode, because often we, ask about people's Star Wars story and whether or not it contributed to their academics at all. And a lot of times the answer is no, but in your case, it really did. And that makes me happy.
It did.
So.
Tell us a little bit where people can find you on social media, a little bit more about where people can get the Ultraview Effect or your book on the Voyager Golden Record.
Sure. The Voyager Golden Record book, working title Voyager's Golden Record, that'll be out in probably August of 2027. The Ultraview Effect, this came out May 12th, and it's available on any retail bookstore you want. It's through University of California Press. Social media, I have deanaweibel.space, which is my own website, all one word, Deana Weibel, and then .space. And then I use ethno-ethereal.
Yeah, we'll make sure to put links and spellings and all that in the show notes.
I'm on Instagram a little bit, Threads, Blue Sky.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming to talk to us. As with every good, Star Warsologies episode, it always makes me want to, well, now I got to go rewatch everything. Think about this sense of awe. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. I appreciate you inviting me. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. That wraps up this episode of Star Warsologies. We want to thank our guest, Deana Weibel, and we want to thank all of you for listening.
San Diego Comic-Con is coming up, so if you will be there, come check us out, though some of our panels will also be recorded and released as bonus episodes of the show. James and I are running a variety of panels.
I'll be running a panel on Friday night, Star Wars Film Tourism, where we talk about visiting different filming locations around the world.
Yes, that's Friday at 6 p.m. in room 7AB, and I will be one of the panelists. I'm excited.
Also, I'll be working with the Fleet Science Center to do a panel on the science of the Mandalorian and Grogu, so check that out.
That one is Saturday from 7:30 to 8:30 in room 5AB. And then immediately come to room 10, because Saturday from 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. is my Science of Tom Cruise panel. I couldn't come up with IP I wanted to cover, so I decided to do the Tom Cruise movies. So we get into all sorts of things, including aliens, cloning, time loops, vampires, that sort of thing. So we've got an all-star lineup of scientists on these various panels, many of whom have also been Star Warsologies guests.
I'm super excited for all the science for Mission Impossible.
Oh yeah, lots of that. Lots of nonsense there. And of course, stunts. All right, and then if you're still around Sunday morning at Comic-Con, come join us for the Mixer for Science-Minded Geeks, run by us and Cosplay for Science. And that'll be in the Marriott Marquis Marina Ballroom D. And we will just be getting together, hanging out, hearing from a couple scientists, but it's also just a great time to ask us your science questions. If you're looking for the links we talked about, check out our show notes page at skywalkingthrough-neverland.com/star-warsologies, and check out the Star Warsologies YouTube channel, where we post all our episodes, including some with related visuals.
If you have an idea for a topic for Star Warsologies or know an expert we should interview, let us know at Star Warsologies on Instagram and Blue Sky, or at starwarsologies@gmail.com. No topic is off limits, even wondering if there is a Geonosis, is there also a Geonobro?
We also have a fan group on Facebook called Star Warsologies Podcast Fan Group. Join us there and chat with us and your fellow listeners. And please also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite service, and share this with your friends.
And if you like puzzles, my book Star Wars Crossword Puzzles is out from Chronicle Books and is available at your local bookstore or on bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and other online booksellers.
We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can find a variety of other great shows about Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel, including the Max FX podcast, the Neverland Clubhouse, and the flagship show Skywalking Through Neverland. There's also a YouTube show called Today in Star Wars History. You can find all of that at skywalkingnetwork.com.
See you next time on Star Warsologies for our Comic-Con episodes.
Woo! Comic-Con!